APUSH exam cram, period 4, from 1800 to 1848. Following last time, Thomas Jefferson was elected, and one of the first things he did was try to create the Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, he purchased a lot of land from Napoleon, the leader of France, who needed money to fight the British. And this landmass stretched very far, as shown here in the map, from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into Canada. This effectively doubled the size of the United States and also helped the U.S. to expand and have more national pride. However, to do this, Jefferson thought it was unconstitutional, so he created a treaty with Napoleon, so he wasn't directly just purchasing land without Congress's help. And then he sent Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark were two explorers who eventually went to explore the Louisiana Purchase land and also go all the way out to the West Coast to see what America was really about and to bring these reports back to the rest of America, which was really only developed on the East during this time. John Marshall was a Supreme Court justice, and his court really helped to shape United States judicial review and the whole power of the Supreme Court. So he was appointed by John Adams, and he was a Federalist from Virginia. But even after the Federalists died out, he still tried to hand down many Federalist cases. So his most notable case was Marbury versus Madison, which was actually more anti-Federalist. In the case Marbury versus Madison, John Adams tried to push more Federalist judges onto the Supreme Court before he left office. But Marshall decided that this was unconstitutional, and he called this judicial review, the right of the Supreme Court to declare laws unconstitutional. This would determine the court's power for many decades to come. Other important court cases included McCulloch versus Maryland, a debate between states' rights and federal rights. Maryland tried to tax the National Bank, which was unconstitutional. Another case was Gibbons versus Ogden in New York, when New York tried to grant a steamboat company a monopoly on trade between New York and New Jersey. Marshall once again said that Congress only had control of interstate commerce, once again hurting states' rights advocates. Around the world, though, powers such as Great Britain and France started threatening America again by impressing or using their navy to take up American sailors. The Embargo Act of 1807, passed by Jefferson, tried to stop this from happening by blocking all international trade. This obviously did not work. In 1812, another war started with Great Britain, the War of 1812, over the impressment of U.S. sailors. War hawks, young political leaders like John C. Calhoun, Daniel Webster, and Henry Clay really wanted to go to war. These leaders would be even more powerful after the war, especially in Congress. During this war, Great Britain actually burned D.C., but ultimately the war was declared a draw. Impressment didn't totally end though. However, America tried to take a larger role in the world as well. In the Monroe administration, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, who would eventually become the 6th president, error here, let me just correct that real quick. Okay, there we go. John Quincy Adams, who would become the 6th president, wrote the Monroe Doctrine. This promoted isolationism, but also America's destiny to westward expansion all the way to the Pacific. And this was a core ideal of America in the Western Hemisphere for the rest of this century. However, sectionalism started to grow. Debates about slavery and regional rights really appeared during this time. In the corrupt bargain of 1824, no candidate actually won the presidential election, so the election went to the House of Representatives. John Quincy Adams eventually won when Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, helped to sway the vote in exchange to become the new Secretary of State, which was basically guaranteed to be the next president. Andrew Jackson, who had held most of the votes before, and his supporters, who were mainly farmers and the common men, called this the corrupt bargain. Ultimately, though, John Quincy Adams did not do too well, and in 1828 Jackson won. Henry Clay, however, was basically the most prominent political figure during this time. He promoted the American system, which was a big infrastructure project to connect the western areas of the U.S., like Kentucky, where he was from, to the east. This also supported the creation of the Second Bank of the United States, after the first one created by Hamilton expired its charter. The other war hawks from before were famous as well. Daniel Webster was the main spokesman for the Northeast, who advocated for tariffs, which was also part of the American system that protected industry. John C. Calhoun was from South Carolina, and he hated tariffs because, of course, South Carolina was heavily based on exports such as cotton. In the nullification crisis, he tried to nullify the tariff and even called it the tariff of abominations. This didn't always work, but it foreshadowed the secession and Civil War to come. But back to Jackson. Jackson was the 7th president and helped to start Jacksonian democracy in the Revolution of 1828, where more white males than ever were able to vote. Participation rates were like 80%. No longer did men have to own land, but other minority groups like African Americans and women still couldn't vote. Jackson was a people's president from the South, and he operated on a spoils system, where his strongest supporters usually got positions in government. He was also a war hero. To the victors belong the spoils was the quote. He was also quite a strong ruler at times and got the nickname King Andrew because multiple times he overstepped his bounds as the President of the United States. He was also known to help form the Democratic Party, and the jackass symbol today was actually another nickname for him. His years marked prosperity, but he had a conflict with the President of the Bank of the United States, Nicholas Biddle. So he eventually started to draw money from the Federal Reserve, the federal bank, to his pet banks in different states. This eventually weakened the bus, and eventually it was canceled. Without a federal bank, the economy went south, and this was really marked in his Vice President Martin Van Buren's term, who was the next president. He was president number 8. Most notably during this time, though, was the rise of the Industrial Revolution. The growth of industry and technology, such as Eli Whitney's cotton gin, really helped to develop America in the rest of the century, especially in the northern states. The cotton gin helped to increase cotton processing so fast, and slaves became very necessary in the South. Movements grew out of this time as well. Nativism was like racism, in that they didn't like immigrants who usually stole northern jobs for working for lower wages in northern factories, and these people were especially anti-Irish. The co-domesticity formed when women were glorified as homemakers. Transcendentalism with authors like Thoreau and Emerson tried to modernize old Puritan beliefs and help people feel through their senses. This was also the time of the Second Great Awakening, where people were more committed to religion and took on more views of it. Finally, environmentalism really grew, especially out west, where people like John J. Audubon started the conservation movement. Reforms grew heavily from the Second Great Awakening. Education was more promoted by people like Horace Mann. Dorothy Dix helped to bring reform against inhumane treatment of insane people. Women such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton held conventions like the Seneca Falls one in New York and wrote a Declaration of Sentiments to promote equality for women. Temperance, abstaining from alcohol, and abolition, the movement to free slaves, were also big reforms that would continue later. Reform was definitely a big part of life. This has been Period 4 of APUSH Exam Cram, 1800 to 1848. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already and share these videos with your friends. Now on to Period 5.